This story is not for faint-hearted. If you are, then it's time for you to press the pause button and turn back. This is an utterly disturbing incident that left me in shambles. I'm a mortician. After medical school, I joined a funeral home in my locality. The first few weeks went fine. The only issue was the after-hours cleaning because the janitor was out of town for some reason. But still, I didn't complain. After finishing my job, I dutifully burned all the wastage in the basement incinerator. During my medical school days, I have had so many experiences that I could easily stand out a gruesome-looking corpse without throwing up or getting scared. Seeing a dead hand tremble, a big toe wiggle, a sudden twitching of the eyes were no big deal to me. I call them a final spark, which generally occurs during the embalming stage. These little details are going to be relevant later. It was a dull Wednesday afternoon. I was working in my morgue with my new buddy, Samuel. He was a 5'11" dark-haired man who lost the battle of life to cancer. I was puncturing the organs in the abdomen to let the gas and float out when I heard footsteps in the corridor. I turned back and saw a man standing at the door with a smile on his face and a mop in his hand.
Good day, sir. I'm Jonathan, the janitor. You must be the new doctor.
I smiled and said,
Nice to meet you, Jonathan. But I'm not a doctor. I don't save lives.
Don't know if he got my sarcasm, but he gave me a people-pleasing giggle and said,
I was out of my sister's wedding. It must have been tiring for you to do the entire cleaning after such long hours of shift. But you don't have to worry anymore. I'm back now.
I thanked him for showing concern and got back to work. Jonathan walked away while mopping the corridor. I didn't have to stay after work for the cleanings anymore. Once I'm done, I put my corpse in the freezer and left right away. Jonathan cleaned everything and locked the funeral home before leaving. He even arrived before me, so a lot of extra responsibilities got cut off from my shoulder. One thing I liked about Jonathan was he kept to himself and never bothered me. One day I was doing the paperwork when the owner called me. I got to know from him that a new corpse is soon to arrive. A close friend of his lost his daughter recently. He also told me that I must do a perfect job so that they can say final goodbyes to their darling daughter. I asked him the cause of her death, to which he told me she committed suicide. The girl hung herself from the ceiling of her room. I told him that it won't be much difficult to prepare her as her body will probably be intact. But the owner interrupted me saying, Actually, there's a little issue. I sensed the tension in his voice, so I asked, What is it? He paused for some time and said, The sudden pressure on her neck has made her tongue come out. Excuse me, as I don't know how to put it, but you have to make her look the way she did. Her parents are shattered. I understood the gravity of the situation and assured him that I will do my best. The body arrived in some hours. I went through her file for more details. The girl's name was Kelly, and she was just 17 years old. I felt bad for her and her parents. She was lying on the table, zipped up inside a plastic bag. I changed into my gloves and usual costume and opened the bag to take a look at her. By now, you all have got a clear idea that death doesn't shock me anymore. But as her face showed up, a sudden gasp came out of my mouth in fear. Kelly was lying still. She was looking at the ceiling with her wide, pale, blue eyes. Her curly blonde hair still smelled of shampoo. But her mouth, oh God, I will never forget that. 60% of her tongue was out of her mouth, resting on her chest. It was way more horrible than my words. It took me some time to get my shit back together. I went to my desk and had some water. The embalming table stood behind me. I finally calmed myself down and turned around to go back. Believe me or not, I found Kelly's head tilted in my direction. She was looking at me with a freaking lively stare, while her tongue hung from the edge of the table. I blamed this sudden change of position on rigor mortis and walked to the table. I then moved her face to the previous position and began my work. I opened her mouth using a gag and started putting her tongue back inside. I had to glue her lips so that by any sudden moment, the tongue never comes out. I also glued her eyes. Then I washed and cleaned her. After making the incision, I sat on a chair nearby and watched her bloody fluids draining out. Once the fluids drained out, I got up to inject the formaldehyde-based chemicals to finish the embalming process. While doing so, I heard Jonathan's voice behind me.
It's sad to see a young life fade away. Isn't it, Doctor?
Even though I told him not to call me a doctor, but he did it anyway. I replied in a low voice. Yes, it is.
How old is she?
17.
That is cruel.
He exhaled in disappointment and started mopping the floor. I finished in some hours and left. I bought some new paints on my way home to deck her up the next morning. The entire night I couldn't sleep, but think about Kelly. I kept drawing pictures in my mind thinking how she was when she was alive. The next day at work, I discovered something very weird. I found Kelly's eyes and mouth wide open. Not just that, there were bruises on her wrists, as if she put pressure on her hands. Yes, I know it's not possible, and no, I wasn't intoxicated. I again glued her mouth and eyes without thinking much about this. But at the back of my mind, I felt something is not right with this corpse. No matter how I placed it, it kept changing its position when I am not looking. Things took an eerie turn. I was getting highly disturbed by all this. I don't believe in ghosts and shit, hence I decided to go to the bottom of this. I placed a security camera inside the morgue to see what exactly happens here at night. I didn't tell anyone about this because everyone would have called me crazy. The next morning, I almost rushed to work to see last night footage. I sat in my cabin and logged into the laptop. First few hours I didn't see anything. Kelly kept lying on the embalming table, covered under a white sheet. There was no one in the room, and everything was quiet. But suddenly, the morgue door opened, and a man walked in. I knew this man. He walked to Kelly and lifted the cover in one go. What he did next disgusted me to the core. He started running his fingers on Kelly's cheeks and then leaned on her to do more obscene things that I can't even speak of. I couldn't watch anymore. I sat on the chair hiding my face in my palms. I was shocked. All this time it was Jonathan. He is the reason why Kelly had those bruises on her arms. I rushed to the washroom and vomited thinking how sick this man is. I had no idea that behind that people-pleasing smile lurks a necrophiliac. I wanted to beat the hell out of him for pulling off this shameful behavior. But before handing him over to the cops, I planned to catch him on the act. Be it dead or alive, she is just a 17-year-old girl who had already suffered enough. I told Jonathan and went home, only to come back after dinner. I left the window in my cabin open Around 9 pm, I sneaked inside from there and waited for the culprit to come back. After 10 to 15 minutes, I heard the main door open. Footsteps appeared in the hallway. I quickly turned on the laptop to watch his every single move. Jonathan entered the morgue and took off the cover from the embabbling table. Kelly was lying on the table like before. He leaned onto her face, and just then the security camera malfunctioned. Glitches appeared on the screen and it turned black. Before I could act on it, I heard a spine-chilling scream outside. I bolted out of the cabin and started to run towards the morgue. As I reached near the door, I found it locked. Jonathan was screaming in excruciating pain. I could hear the commotion going inside the morgue like he was struggling for his life. The lights of the entire funeral home started to flicker like crazy, and heavy wind came from the rattling windows. I tried my best to open the door, but I couldn't. This continued for a few more minutes, and then everything became dead silent. The morgue door opened on its own after that. I rushed inside to see broken glasses dispersed on the floor and equipment scattered here and there. It was a mess. My eyes went to the left corner, and I froze on the ground. Jonathan was lying on the floor, dead. His jaw was broken, as if a strong force smashed it in one go. Blood was coming out of his mouth like a fountain, and above all that, he had no tongue. I slowly walked close to the table to take a look at Kelly. She was lying still like she always did. Her eyes and mouth were wide open. Again. But this time, I found something more. Inside her mouth rested a chunk of a bloody human tongue that wasn't hers. I called the cops and provided them with the footage that I could gather. But Jonathan's death remained unsolved. After all, no law in this universe is capable to punish a corpse with murder charges. If you ask me, I strongly feel he got what he deserved. And Kelly took her revenge.